First up, I've got, it's going to be Davenport and Company. It's going to be Mr. Roger Murray. Let me try this again. Roger Murray and Doug Gebhardt. They're going to talk to us about the issuance of revenue bonds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name's Doug Gebhardt with Davenport and Company. We're serving as the county's financial advisor, and Roger Murray is with the firm Murray Barnes Finister, and he'll serve as the bond counsel. And so if there's legal questions, Roger's here to answer those, but I'm here to kind of talk through kind of the finances and the plan of finance and get your blessing on the recommended path forward. Again, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. As we dig into the presentation, you have a hard copy in front of you and electronic versions up on the screen. What we are ultimately looking to finance is for the jail expansion project. The county had a study done that broke it out into 3 different phases. But what we're ultimately looking to pursue today is the phase 1 of that project, which totals just north of $61.5 million. So that's what we've focused our presentation here today. So flipping the page, as a reminder to, and this presentation is meant to be interactive, so please stop me if you have any questions along the way. As a reminder, this project was included in the SPLOST referendum that was approved by the voters in November, or in March, pardon me. That authorized up to $138 million of collections countywide, which will begin October 1 of 25. Within that SPLOST authorization, it included $51 million that could be allocated towards this project, with approximately $708,000 monthly going towards this. That's kind of how the breakout is. So every dollar that comes in first, the first $708,000 goes to this, totaling $51 million. Obviously, based upon the estimated project cost of $61.5, $51 million only covers a portion of that, not to mention any interest that might be involved. So we have to look at exploring ways to seek longer-term financing options in order for you all to be able to accomplish these projects. So flipping to page 3, what our job and what we've been tasked by county staff to pursue is really to develop a series of funding options for your consideration, and we'll come forth with you with really 2 potential options, but a recommended option within those 2. And our goal, obviously, is to produce something that has the favorable cost of borrowing, that strategically uses that $51 million that has been authorized by the voters, and also makes use of future SPLOST, and also how that might impact general fund dollars in the future. But ultimately want to do is recommend a path forward that does not jeopardize the county's fiscal credit worthiness or credit strengths that you currently enjoy today. So we want to make sure that our recommended approach keeps all of those intact. Any questions before I move to kind of the next section? Seeing none, we'll move on. Just a reminder for those on the board, this is the countywide SPLOST on page 5. And you can see that the county's enjoyed some pretty nice growth on the county SPLOST, averaging, just shy of 10% over the last 5 years, growing from $13.5 million to just north of $19 million in the last, what we'll call the SPLOST year. And so flipping to the next page, one of the things that we wanted to think about or consider is that within the SPLOST intergovernmental agreement, additional surplus dollars could potentially be used for this project. But based upon the projections that got to that number, they're fairly aggressive. So going from 8% down to 6%. So in this analysis, we've kind of been overly conservative and didn't assume that any surplus funds above the originally allocated $51 million would be available to be allocated towards this project. Again, as a reminder, collections on this next SPLOST begin October 1 of this year. So obviously, I think one of the, flipping to the next few pages, is a natural question as you're thinking about entering the market for debt is what interest rates have been doing. And so what we've done on the next 2 pages is really taken a look at to show you what tax exempt interest rates have done since January of 23, so over the last 2 years. And they've really been in a relatively narrow trading window. Right now, while interest rates are higher than they were in pandemic levels, they're kind of been consistent since the Fed has raised their rates towards the end of 2022. Towards the far right end of the page, there's a little bit of a market blip as a result of some of the tariff announcements. But since then, the market has been stabilized, and we're seeing still plenty of demand for tax exempt paper. So we would expect no issues being able to go to market for this issuance. And the next page just shows the rates since the start of this year. You can see they've been relatively stable over the start of 2025. So as we think about this, moving into the financing approach in our scenario overview, based upon our conversation with the county staff and our understanding of the financing mechanisms available to the county at hand, we're recommending an issuance through the Public Facilities Authority via a public market sale. The way that the Public Facilities Authority issuance would work is that the Public Facilities Authority issues the bonds on behalf of the county. Then the county would then enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the authority to guarantee the repayment of that bond. And within that intergovernmental agreement, you would be pledging your full faith and credit and taxing power to support that. So if you have questions on the legal structure, Roger's here to answer that, but I think I did a high-level view of that. So ultimately, you're pledging your full faith and credit, but our plan is to utilize SPLOST revenues to repay the debt. But I think it's an important consideration for us as we think about our future analysis and where we come to our recommendation here today, is that in the event the next iteration of SPLOST, it's not included on the ballot if there's something that happens, ultimately the general fund is what is on the hook for the repayment of the debt. So I think that's an important consideration. So that's the type of bond we're going to do it. The way we're going to issue, or way we're recommending issuing it, is through a public market sale as opposed to a direct bank loan. Just given the relative size of the transaction at hand and the term that we're looking to issue, the amount of banks that can go out 20 years is very limited, and there's not virtually any banks that are able to loan north of $60 million. So we're going to go out to the public markets, renew the county's credit rating, prepare an official statement, and ultimately sell the bonds competitively, which means we put it out to bid, and unbiased as to who provides the lowest interest cost on the day of the sale. So that's who we'll be awarding the purchase of the bonds to. And then ultimately, that's when we'll know the final rates, and they'll be locked in, and we'll come back to you all with those recommendations. So as we look about we've talked about how we're going to do it and the method of sale. We looked at 2 potential scenarios for you. First is what we call scenario 1, which is a 12-year amortization structure. So the thought for that is it would match basically 2 SPLOST cycles. So not this one, and then the 2031 SPLOST as well. And we also looked at a case that went out 20 years as well. For purposes of conservatism, we added in 0.5% of cushion to the interest rate in our assumptions here today. So flipping forward a few pages here without boring you on the assumptions, various closing dates, couponing structure, repayment provisions, but ultimately what the debt service looks like. This is on scenario 1. And so what you can see on this particular case in the first 6 years, highlighted there in the blue section of that year presentation, is that we've maximized that $51 million. So we're paying off as much debt as we possibly can within the next 6 years with that $51 million. And we've taken into account and run the detailed cash flows to make sure it all works. So in order to pay that off within a 12-year period, consistent with 2-year SPLOST, the remaining debt service on the bond would be roughly $4.5 million a year over the next 6 years. So that total would bring you to roughly $27 million that would need to come from the next SPLOST in order to make this happen. Okay? Any questions about that?
What's the interest rate on this?
So if you look down there on the bottom right-hand side, the all-in true interest cost is 4.29%. That includes all closing costs, fees associated with that.
You mentioned the next SPLOST. Can the next SPLOST pay off existing debt?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It needs to be worded appropriately and working with bond counsel and your staff to make sure that it'd be done in that fashion.
Is there any way to do a shorter than 12 years?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have those numbers?
We don't at this time.
Okay. All right. Just hate to pay $16 million worth of interest. And how about a GO bond? Was that not an option for this?
It would require going to voter referendum,
Okay.
which is an ability to do so. But I would have to ask Roger if it would be eligible for SPLOST repayment.
When you say a GEO bond issue, do you mean one that's going to be paid off during what I consider a GEO sales tax bond issue that's going to be paid off during the 6 years, or a separate GEO bond issue where you're going to have the question for, a longer term bond?
It would be the 6 years.
The 6 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So you can do as part and parcel of an existing sales tax, you can add on GEO bonds at the same time, but it has to be paid off within that 6-year term. And so that the math doesn't work here to get it paid off in the 6-year term. So then you have to default, if you're going to go beyond 6 years, you have to either use the revenue bond structure, or you have to have a separate question. Can we issue GEO bonds that are something longer than the 6 years? And then it would be paid off with this, sales tax and then a future sales tax after that.
Gotcha. What's the interest rate on a GO bond compared to a revenue bond that we're doing?
It's the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's the same, half
Yeah,
percent.
Same thing. Bear in mind that this is his estimate. We won't know the actual interest rate until you make a decision and we solicit, the sale of the bonds, and they'll be locked in. So we'd come back before you at a future meeting date. This is just his best estimate right now.
With
current market conditions.
with a 0.5% of
Yeah.
cushion.
Plus 0.5%.
Yes, sir. So we could go shorter. It would just further stress a future SPLOST, but we really can't go shorter within that 6-year period because we've maximized this current SPLOST.
Yeah, I understand that. I was just thinking like maybe an 8 or 9 year versus a 12. See what the difference in the total cost would be on something like that.
You could do that, but then you'd really have no dollars left over for any other capital projects. So you're going back and look, and your total countywide collections last year was only $19 million, right? And so I don't know how much is allocable towards the county, but assuming, like I said, I don't have the rough numbers here, but it would basically take almost a full 2 years plus of collections and have no other projects to be able to get done if you were to explore that option.
And one of the points that'll become clear in a minute is going 12 years or going 20 years, you can still, we're going to preserve the option for you to pay it off early. So, again, if you look at the 20 years or you look at the 12 years, you can prepay the bonds. The standard call or prepayment provision in a bond deal is 10 years. And you could actually get a shorter call if you wanted. But for example, in his numbers, where he has it going 12 years out, if you wanted to, you could actually prepay him in year 10, thereby reducing the interest rate, the interest that are paid for the last 2 years. It's almost like, think about when you do a home loan. If you can get a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, or 30 years. What a lot of people do is they start with the 30-year, and then they know they can prepay it early if they want. So they have a smaller payment for future flexibility, but then if they want, they can prepay it early. So I'm
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt there.
No, helpful.
That's kind of the concept of with the 10-year prepayment provision.
Did that answer your question? You have further questions? Okay. And so what I mentioned earlier on the structure between doing the revenue bond through the Public Facilities Authority, guaranteeing the full faith and credit, makes it critical on page 19 or 16, the next page, is what would happen if for some reason we can't obligate future boards to put this on the SPLOST. We can't obligate the citizens to approve the SPLOST. We don't know how negotiations with the city, if they're going to guarantee dollars up front. And so what we wanted to show you guys is, hey, at the end of year 6, what would happen if something unforeseen were to occur and either there's a failed referendum or the next board doesn't put this project on, what would it look like in terms of the impact on your overall finances? And so what we did here is showing that the debt service comes out to roughly $4.5 million a year. And so based upon your current county digest, the estimated mill produces roughly $3.5 million. And so let's say for some reason it doesn't happen and fiscal year 2032 comes around and we now have to find $4.5 million in our budget. What's the millage equivalent impact that would occur to the county's finances? And that would be 1.29 mils based upon the current digest. So we're not saying that a future board would have to increase the millage rate. You would have to think about cutting expenses, increasing the millage, finding other revenue sources, but the millage equivalent impact is 1.29 mils, which we thought was pretty substantial and something that you all needed to be aware of, that if a SPLOST wasn't approved in the future, that ultimately the county's general fund would be on the hook. So that's part of the reason we didn't go much shorter, because if we made those payments $10 million plus, that's a pretty big nut to crack on the general fund. So what we did on the next scenario is scenario 2. We looked at going out 20 years. And 20 years is what I would say is typical for a governmental facility. It kind of matches the useful life of the asset. It creates a little bit more of that generational equity. So those that are using the facility pay for the facility over the same amount of time. That's typically what we see for governmental type projects. And so what we can do is, in this particular case, you can see we still maximized the upfront first 6 years to maximize that $51 million. But then we amortized the remaining years 7 through 20, what's called a level debt service, or a mortgage style repayment, where it's the same annual payment in any given year. And that number decreased from $4.5 million to $2.4 million. And so the debt service being paid out of the potential next SPLOST decreased from $27 million down to $14.3 million. And so one of the benefits of doing it this way is that, knowing that the county is a growing county and there's going to be additional projects, there's additional phases of the jail that needs to be done, is that just alone in reducing that debt service structure, that debt service repayment, even though you're going to be paying slightly more interest over time, does create a little bit of flexibility as you're thinking about future projects, future PAYGO capital, future budgetary impacts. And so what we did on the next page showed you what the millage equivalent impact would be going out on the next one. And very similarly, general fund could potentially be on the hook in the future. But that millage equivalent impact dropped from 1.29 down to 0.68, 0.69, depending on the rounding in any given year. And so what we did on obviously that allows for some flexibility in cash flow, so decisions don't have to be made today. But we wanted to show you on what the next page looked like. As Roger mentioned, we wanted to show you that the way that we're structuring these bonds allow for repayment at year 10 without penalty. And so what we said is, hey, you can still structure the bonds to be paid off over a 20-year period, but you could have the ability to pay this off early if that's the desire of the board in the future. So what we showed is that on this page, that the remaining 15.5 million that would be outstanding at the end of the next SPLOST would get paid off early. So by paying it off early as opposed to leaving it to final maturity, you have a pretty decent interest rate savings by going forth in that manner. So that is a potential option that it kind of gives you the best of both worlds, where it gives you future cash flow flexibility, but could pay it off early if it's the desire of the board at that time. And so what we've done on this page is the next page showed the various debt service summaries and the various millage rate impacts and the total debt service. Obviously the scenario 2, paying it off over a longer period, does create a little bit more interest costs, but it does allow for some financial flexibility. So wrapping up here, the recommendation and rationale, based upon our conversations with county staff, we're thinking that the option 2 financing is the recommended approach. And the reason for that is, one, it maximizes the funds available from the current SPLOST, and it leaves you the most flexibility in the future. One, it allows you flexibility in how many dollars are allocated from the future SPLOST. So you could continue to pay debt service, so you only have to come up with 14 million, or you could pay it off early and come up with 29 million, or it could be some combination thereof. Whatever work mixes and matches works in the future, it gives you that flexibility. It also gives you the ability to allocate future SPLOST dollars to projects that may be critical at the time. You don't know where we're going to be 6 years from now, and there might be some additional projects that might require more immediate SPLOST dollars off the top, that the jail's not as critical at that point. So that's another way. And then obviously, I think it minimizes the potential impact on the millage rates in the general fund in the event some unforeseen reason that SPLOST dollars aren't available to service debt beyond year 6. Then obviously you could redeem the bonds early, and 20 years is typical for the governmental type projects. So that's our recommendation to you today, following conversations with county staff. And then the next page, as I wrap up, and then I'll open the floor for any questions you may have, is tonight you have in front of you a resolution asking, authorizing the professionals and staff to proceed with the issuance of these bonds. And within that resolution, you're directing us to the path that you want us to move forward. So hoping to get some direction on that today. June 17th, we're going to come back to you to adopt what's called the parameters bond resolution, which sets forth the not to exceed terms and conditions with the issuance of the debt, par amount, interest rates, final maturities, maximum annual debt service, just to name a few. We'll go through the legal process, validate the bonds, talk to the rating agencies in early to mid-July, and come back to you with the bond sale results on August 5th, at which point we would ask the board and the facilities authority to formally approve the pricing, the final pricing results and terms and conditions with the associated with the sale the morning of that day, and we would close towards the end of August. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And Roger, anything you'd like to add from the legal perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for your time. I know it's a lot of information, a lot to digest, but we hope this gave you some clarity on the path forward. And we're excited to be working on this project and serving as the county's financial advisor.
So with the
going back to the bonds and doing the revenue generating bonds, is there any advantage to doing a government authority financing versus a revenue generating bond?
So the facilities authority bond is the only way that we think that the county can produce to get a credit rating that would be sufficient to cover the debt service and get in that AA. To do a revenue producing bond, you'd only have to rely on the revenues of the project that would be being produced. And we know that, a jail probably wouldn't be enough to self-sustain its own revenue sources. So you're looking at interest rates and terms that would be materially longer and more expensive.
Was that your question, a pure revenue bond versus the structure we're proposing?
Well, instead of doing a revenue generating bond, what is the advantage of that over a government authority financing? Just where we
Well,
would,
this really is a government authority. So you probably are familiar with development authority, the development
Right.
authority you have. So the development authority assists in financing private projects, right? The development authorities cannot do governmental projects. Well, you all had legislation adopted at the General Assembly that created a public facilities authority. The Public Facilities Authority is an authority that's set up to to assist with governmental financing. So Development Authority does private financings. The Public Facilities Authority's sole purpose is to do what it's doing right here, and that is to assist with governmental financings. And so the way it works is they have the power to issue bonds, right, to finance governmental projects, and you obviously have the power to provide a jail. And then you enter into an intergovernmental contract related to that jail, and you basically agree to pay the debt service on the bonds. That's the structure. And because, as Doug explained, because the county is sort of guaranteeing, if you will, the debt service on the bonds, then you get the same credit rating as if you did a GO bond issue. So, and it's a there's Public Facilities Authority created all over the state by cities and counties. It's used widely, very common structure. The investors are used to seeing it. The rating agencies are used to seeing it.
so one more question. Additional debt. Why wouldn't we just wait till the end of the SPLOST when we have this $60 million and then go out and build a jail versus accruing all the debt?
Yeah, naturally, I think there's two answers to this. One is that, your voters approved it, and so they want to see, projects go right away. And then two, obviously, I think there's inflationary costs, right, and building costs. And if you were to ask this same question, just hypothetically, the voters approved the last one in 2018, and where prices are today, you're looking at your compounding rate of inflation is vastly superior to the interest rate that we're looking at, which is 4%. So not only do you get your project done sooner, which is going to make all your public safety personnel much more happy, you're spending the dollars as they come in. You're not accruing tax monies and just letting it come into the bank, and you're also building the project on today's dollars as opposed to 2031 dollars. And then in 2031, you only have 51 million of the 61 million. So then you have to wait probably another 2 to 3 years to get the additional collections for any additional dollars that would come above and beyond that.
And also do reinvest the bond proceeds during construction. It eases the pain a little bit.
I'd like to ask, Christie, you looked at this, is this part of your recommendation?
Yes, we've had several conversations about this, and the staff supports the recommendation to do the 20-year financing just for the flexibility of it. I at first was a little bit thinking that we should do shorter, but I after thinking all the way through it, we don't know what is going to happen 6 years from now, so it's a little bit scary to think if SPLOST didn't pass and we had to pay for it from the general fund, it would be nice to have that smaller payment, especially with the flexibility to be able to pay it off early. So that's the recommendation that I support.
One of the things about putting things on the SPLOST, we had, the ag arena had been put on the SPLOST for some years, and we kicked it down the road and kicked it down the road. And, the citizens kind of kept asking us, when are we gonna build the ag arena? And when we decided to build the ag arena, at that time, it cost way more than when we thought it was gonna cost at the time that we put it on there. So that is true, that if you put it on the SPLOST agenda and you don't start doing it, it's gonna cost you more than when you started. That's just the way money goes.
I guess the thing that I would comment too is based on the relationship and what Davenport has done for us in the past, is we've had good results. And I know Christie has looked at the numbers, whatever, and I know that I feel like all the commissioners, we're very intent on finding ways that we can pay this down earlier. As you used the analogy already about home mortgages, you know, we don't want to pay it any longer, we have to. But I think it would behoove us to go with the recommendation, so that it gives us some leverage and not put us under pressure. I think we have enough of that already.
Mr. Newkirk, I believe you were wanting to ask a question.
Yeah, I mean, I know the citizens approved this, but it was also stated that it was going to cost like $61 million to build it. And I don't know if the citizens would have approved it if they would have saw 70 or 78 million and $84.5 million. So that's where I'm kind of a little weary on that. I just, you know, you're talking about, I mean, that's $16 million over, and I mean, that's a good bit over that. I don't know if the citizens would have known that, and I don't know if they would have voted for it if they knew it was going to be a bond attached to it. I think everybody, you know, because there was no mentioning of it in the SPLOST, and I think the fact that it was not mentioned in the voting of the SPLOST, that everybody assumed they were just going to build it. You know, I had no idea it was going to be $84 million.
Well, that's fair, you're right, and the ballot question didn't have that, but in the intergovernmental contract, it was also approved at the same time. It specifically mentioned the fact that the building authority would issue debt for it. But you're right, that's not the same thing as having it on the ballot, but it was an integral part of all that.
Any other questions or discussion on this matter?
I'd like to have at least another meeting to look at these numbers. This is $84 million that we just got like 20 minutes ago. You know, if we would have had this information beforehand, that we could have been a little bit more prepped on it, that could have possibly helped. But I think this is more than our annual budget. And we go through a long process for our annual budget, and I think we need some more time to think on this one. So I'd make a motion to table it if I had that opportunity.
So are you stating that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to table this for another meeting so we can get all the answers and look through it and actually have time to study an $84 million bond.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Got a second. Any further discussion here? Hearing no further discussion, I'm going to ask for a vote. All in favor? All against? Motion passes 3-2.
Thank y'all.